Well, good morning, everybody. How we doing today? Good. Now, have you ever considered or thought about how often we use the word take? Like take a turn, take a shower, take a chance, take a hint, take a bite, take it slow, take 2 aspirin, and call me in the morning.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd.
Take your pencil, take your test, take your time, begin, because take it from me, you don't want to take the 8th grade. Again, take care, take charge, take heed, take car, take it back, take a punch. Hey, take it outside, take a chill pill.
Take on me, take on me, take me on.
Get a little higher next service, thanks. May I take your order? Take your shoes off, take a load off, take it easy, double take. Would you take a look at that? Take the shot, take it to him, take it to the hole, take that out of here. Take the bull by the horns, take the good with the bad, take a rain check.
Every move you make, every breath you take.
Take it on, take it off, take it all off. What do you take me for anyways? Do you take this man? Do you take this woman? Take this ring, take a honeymoon, take it for granted, take it to court to take him to the cleaners.
Take me down to the paradise city where the grass is green and the girls are pretty. Take me home, yeah.
Take a second, take a minute, take a walk, take a break, take a vacation, but be sure to take your Visa because they don't take American Express. Take your hands off your brother, take your finger out of your nose, take the dog outside, take the cat out of the dryer. This is old school Calgon. Take me away.
Country road, take me home to the place
I belong.
West Virginia.
All right, get out of here. Will you all take a moment to help me thank Logan? Yes, now take a hike, take a hike. All right, well, we've been in this series over the last couple weeks called When Kingdoms Collide, and we've been looking at when earthly kingdom politics collide with heavenly kingdom politics. And I know what some of you are thinking. If you've been here the last 2 weeks, you're thinking, hey, Greg, you said it would only be a 2-week series, and I've avoided church the last 2 weeks because I didn't want to hear any more about politics and that rhetoric in today's culture. Well, do not fret. Take a breath. Jesus, take the wheel. We're going to shift a little bit away from American politics today. And yes, we're going to stay in the series, but I want to go back in time. And today what I want to do is I want to take a look at a story, and I made allusion to this story a little bit last week. It's about 3 Hebrew boys living in a kingdom that was not their home. And as we look at their story, I think we can take a lesson from them on how to live our faith out when kingdoms collide, and we can be inspired by how they lived their faith out. And their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But did you know that's not their actual names? That was their Babylonian names, but they were 3 Hebrew boys. Their Hebrew names were actually Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so it begs the question, why were their names changed? Well, let me give you a quick history lesson. We're going to go roughly to about 600 BC. And at this point in history, the greatest power in the world at the time was the Babylonian Empire. Think the Persians before them, or you think Greeks, you think Romans, you think of these great world powers. That was Babylon circa 600 BC. And their king was a guy by the name of King Nebuchadnezzar. And he had pillaged Jerusalem. He had overtaken Judah and the kingdom of Israel. He had destroyed Solomon's temple. This is the place where God's people would go to worship. And when he would destroy a land or destroy a city, he would essentially take captive the people that lived there and bring them into exile. And so when he would take them captive, the ones that he would bring into his palace or into royal service were the best of the best. So he would take the young, the bright, the smart, the handsome. He would bring them in to work for them. And part of his practice then was to give them new names. He would give them Babylonian names as to say, hey, you're a part of us now. You used to be a part of that kingdom, but you're a part of this kingdom now. They'd be schooled in the way of the Babylonians. They'd be immersed in their culture as to indoctrinate them. And then after a few years of this indoctrination, they would be allowed to enter into royal service. So think about it in maybe this context. This would be like a foreign power invading the United States of America, taking over the United States, and then they would take captive all of the brightest and the best from Harvard and Stanford and Yale and Rockford U and Rock Valley, right? They'd take all the best and they would make them work in government service. And so the most famous Hebrew boys that were taken were Daniel, who's writing the book that we're reading from or reading out of today, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so I want you to think about these boys now for a second. They grew up as children of God in the nation of Israel, the nation of Judah. They're now being told who they are. Doesn't matter who you used to think you are, you're now a part of this new kingdom. They're being told how to think. They're being told how to assimilate, how to fit into the culture around them. So they're being bombarded with opportunities to not only forsake their upbringing, but to forsake their God, to indulge in this pagan, sin-filled way of life. Does this sound like a culture you know? But as you will see, they were able to change their names and they were able to change their culture, but what they could not touch and what they could not change were their hearts, because they would be loyal to God no matter what came their way. And this story can be so empowering for us because in a way, we too are living in a Babylon. We are living right now in a world that's trying to tell you who you are. Everything through media and marketing, social media, culture is trying to tell you how to define you. They're trying to tell you how to think. Culture, both societal culture, political culture, the pressure of it is trying to tell you what to value, what you should care about, all to get you to assimilate. Also that you would essentially indulge in a way of life that just pulls you away from your relationship with God. But we too, if they can do it, we too can stay loyal to our God, even in the midst of the craziness and the culture and the pressure all around us, that we can be in this world. Like the old adage says, we can be in this world, but we do not have to be of this world. Now, Christians tend to approach living in their Babylon in one of three ways. I would say the first approach is that Christians like to isolate. They will isolate, i.e. the best way to not assimilate, the best way to not become like the world is let's just avoid it at all costs. The world has cooties, ew, yuck, stay away. And so they'll only do business with Christian people. They'll only have Christian friends, only consume Christian media. Let's wrap our kids in bubble wrap and put them in the basement. And in the basement, we can churn our own butter and make our own denim, and we'll be fine. We'll isolate. There's two problems with this. First of all, sin is not just in the world, because we have a sin nature, which means sin follows us. It's with us, unfortunately, wherever we go. And sometimes, though, the hardest sins to confront are the ones we mask in our own good deeds and religion. The pride that wells up inside of us. And the second problem with this strategy is we were called by Jesus to do what? To go into the world. We're supposed to share Jesus with our Babylon all around us. Now, the second approach that Christians tend to do is the opposite extreme. They imitate. So you have isolate, now they'll imitate. Well, I'll just blend in, but we're not supposed to blend in. Right? We talked about this last week, but the church, the word church in the Greek New Testament, it means to be called out. We're supposed to live in such a way that it distinguishes us from Babylon. We were called by Jesus to be salt. What does salt do? It brings flavor. It's a spice. It brings seasoning. We're supposed to spice things up. We're called by Jesus to be light, which means we shine a bright light in the darkness. But then if we act like or talk like or look like everyone else, then why would anyone see anything different in us? Why would anyone want to consider the God that we worship? And so then there's a third approach, and this is the Great Commission approach, and this is when we infiltrate. When we live out heavenly kingdom values from up there, but we bring them down here, where we go into this world. Now, we can go into the world. We don't have to be of the world, but we're going to go into the world, but we have a different OS. We have a different operating system. We're on a mission from God. And so we know that we're temporary residents here. We know that we're foreigners here. And so we have to live with kingdom purpose. And this is in part what we talked about a little bit last week, that Peter was telling and challenging the church all throughout the Roman Empire to live in such a way, an honorable life, to live proper, that people see the good that's coming out of you and then they give honor to God, that they see God is real by how we live. You see, people won't see God by isolation. You can't impact a world if you're not willing to touch it. They won't see God by imitation. You can't impact a world if you're not willing to stand out from it. But they will see God through infiltration when we serve and give and invite, like a city on the hill. We live different so that people can look up to us and see something different in us. And infiltration is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. They made the most of being foreigners in exile, as captives in Babylon, because what they knew is that you can take me away from Israel, but you can't take the God of Israel away from me. I can live my faith out wherever my 2 feet are planted. And so how did they infiltrate their kingdom and live out their faith? And so the first thing that they did is something we all can do, is that they were willing to take God's way. They were willing to take God's way. Remember how I talked about they were immersed in Babylonian culture? Well, one of the ways that they were immersed in Babylonian culture, especially the young boys that were brought into royal service, is that they were allowed to eat the food off of the king's table, and they were expected to eat the food of the Babylonians. But look at this verse at the very beginning of the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 8. It says, "But Daniel and the 3 boys resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way." Now, we're not sure exactly why or what they were eating that made Daniel and the 3 boys feel like they couldn't eat the food, but we get a clue here. It says they didn't want to defile themselves, which means the food was probably unclean due to the Jewish laws. It probably wasn't prepared in a kosher manner, in a way that was part of their customs or a part of their culture. It was probably a forbidden food, like pork was forbidden to Jews in the Old Testament. Thank God for Jesus that we get pork back, but that's because of the new covenant. Old covenant, you couldn't eat bacon, okay? Not to mention that the food was probably offered to idols first, and so of course this would be forbidden as well. And so what these kids decided is that they weren't gonna compromise their values just for a piece of bacon. Now, we hear that sometimes and we think, well, what's the big deal, man? Was it thick cut? Was it maple soaked? I mean, that might have been worth it. Like, why does it matter? But here's what these young men knew. That once you start compromising your values in small ways, the line begins to move and it gets easier to cross that line every single time. And before you know it, you look like, you act like, you talk like everyone else, and now you're acting and talking and looking like a person that you never thought you would be, because you began to somewhere down the line cross the line and begin to compromise. But you see, Daniel and these 3 boys, they also knew something that I think is important for us to remember sometimes as we figure out how to live out our values for God. It wasn't just about what not to do. And so often we want to reduce our faith to the things that we don't do, but they also understood it was about doing things God's way, to take God's way. Why? Because God's way is actually better. And we don't have time, but for the sake of time, I'll summarize. Daniel went on to say to the royal official, he's like, look, we're not going to eat the king's food, but let us eat and do things our way, God's way, and you can test us in this. We're going to eat only vegetables and water for 10 days, and then you can test us, you can compare us to everybody else, and you can see how we do. And then 10 days later, they did exactly this. They compared Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to all of the other boys that had been taken captive, and they were healthier, stronger, fitter, smarter, faster, all of the above. Shocker, broccoli is better than bacon. But the idea is that God actually knows what's best for us because he made us. And so sometimes it's less about what not to do and to do things God's way, because if he knows us and he knows what's best for us, then it's us operating at our best when we do things for him. And we see that these 3 boys, they set a precedent, that they were willing to take God's way, even in the small choices, which now began to lay a foundation for them that would give them the strength and fortitude that not only were they willing to take God's way when the small obstacles came, but they were now willing to have the strength to take God's way when the big obstacles come. And we see that strength because they were now willing to take a stand. Take a stand. Now, if you want to follow along with the rest of the narrative, we're going to jump to Daniel chapter 3. But a little background before I read to you some scripture from Daniel chapter 3. Once again, King Nebuchadnezzar, think of him as the top dog in the land, right? And so this clearly went to his head. He has taken over the entire civilized world at this point in human history. And because of that, he's trying to now establish and protect his empire for generations. And one of the ways that he thinks he can establish and protect his empire is by controlling through fear. And so he builds a statue. It's not just a human-sized statue. He builds a 90-foot statue made of gold of himself. Now, it's not just enough that he builds a statue of himself, but at the sound of music, at any point over the PA system of Babylon, when people hear the music, they had to bow down and worship his statue. But not our boys. They refused to do this. So word gets back to the king. Hey, Those Hebrew boys that you brought into the palace, they refuse to bow down when the music plays. They're not doing what you told everyone to do. You brought all the government officials into this, and you got all the who's who in society into this, and you've made this clear that this was the law. And total sidebar, if you're gonna live out your faith for Jesus, no matter what you do, there's always gonna be a group of haters that hate. There's always gonna be a group of people that don't understand it and will want to rat you out. And so let's jump now to verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music," they needed better instruments back then. What is a zither? I don't even know. But anyways, "if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace." And it was probably right there. They probably used this furnace to smelt the gold, to make the gold for the statue. And he goes on to say, "Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" All right, so now the pressure's on. They're given an ultimatum. Bow down, you hear the music, you hit the knee. And if you don't, you die. And they're probably thinking, okay, you know what? I mean, I could take a quick knee. I could bow with my body. I don't have to mean it in my heart. All he's asking me to do is just go with the crowd. Everybody else is doing it. It's no big deal. I mean, it's one thing to not go with the crowd to eat a little bit of food off the king's table, but that just might leave me a little hungry. But in this moment, if I don't go with the crowd now, that'll leave me a little bit dead. And so you could see how they could begin to rationalize this. Well, I can't live for God, and I surely can't make an impact in this kingdom if I'm dead, so I have to take a knee. But remember something. They had already set a precedent that they were going to take God's way. But you don't get the strength to resist kings without resisting food first. And you say, "Greg, what do you mean?" What I mean is the character that comes and that you need to take a stand in the big things, it comes from making the right choices in the small things when nobody's paying attention and when nobody's looking behind the scenes. That's when character is built and fortitude is built. So then when the big moments come, you have already tested yourself and proven that you are the type of person that's willing to take a stand and that you won't crumble under pressure. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this manner." What they're saying is, what you're accusing us of is true. Yes, we will not bow. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, and notice they're being respectful, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So when the pressure of society, when societal politics or social pressures call people to conform and to blend in, to take, quote unquote, the knee to anything other than God and God's way, that pressure, the pressure of society and people wanting to be liked and people wanting to fit in will make some fold. It will make them comply. It will make them conform. But there always has been and there always will be a remnant of people who say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I will not comply. I'll respect you, but no, I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. And when we hear of stories where people refuse to comply and to stand up for what is right, do we not love stories like that? Think of the movie 300, if you've ever seen that movie. Right? It's the Battle of Thermopylae, and it's the Spartan soldiers with their abs all ripped, and they're like, no, look at my six-pack. I won't bend to you, Persia. And they fight back the entire Persian army. Or you think of the Alamo, and we're like, yeah, we'll take a stand for Texas, even though it was a bunch of people from Tennessee, but that's a different history lesson. But the people from the Alamo are like, well, remember the Alamo. Or in modern history, think of Rosa Parks, somebody who was willing to take a stand by not standing. She's like, no, I don't think I'm going to give up my seat today. I'm just not going to do that. This picture I came across this week of a guy, I believe it was 1936 at a Nazi rally, and something about this picture just really spoke to me, thinking of this politics and political pressure and social pressure. And there's some debate over who he is, but most people believe his name is August Landmesser, and he's a German guy. And you can see here, I mean, this might as well been King Nebuchadnezzar, Hitler, with a gold statue telling everybody to bow, right? And notice he's got his arms crossed. No, I don't think I'm going to do that. Everybody else may, not me. And as the story goes, he had fallen in love with a Jewish girl. And because he had fallen in love with a Jewish woman, he refused to conform to the ideals of the Nazi party at that time, and he went to prison for it. But you see, we love stories like this. These stories inspire us, and we love them so much until it requires us to be the one who takes that stand. And then we're like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna put it in my backpack so no one sees it. This little light of mine, I don't think today I want to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to turn around and walk the other way. And it begs the question, so where does one get the courage to take a stand like that in the face of societal pressure, political pressure, the pressure of your friends, the pressure of the crowd? Well, when you look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these are just some average boys, and it's not like they had some supernatural power in that moment. They're willing to take a stand because of something that we all can do. It's because they knew their God. And the more they knew their God, the more confident in him they were. And I want you to notice something about their confidence in God. They were confident in God without even knowing what God was going to do. It literally says, King, you can do what you want. God may save us. They're like, we don't know if he will. He can, he may not. But he is still God and you are not. And so we're going to take our chances with him. You see, their confidence in God was predicated not on what he did. They knew what he was capable of, but their confidence in God was predicated on his character. They knew he was God, and they knew who he was. He had proven himself to be faithful. This is a silly analogy, but I think some of you will get it. If you're a sports fan, in sports fandom, people love to debate questions like this and to have these types of arguments that sometimes don't have the right answer. This one does, but they'll say, if you only had one shot to take the last shot in a game, and the game was on the line, and it's to game 7 to win the NBA Finals, who do you want to take that shot? Is it LeBron or Steph? And immediately you know you can't even talk to that person anymore. You want to know why? Because the answer always has been, will be Michael Jordan. He's the GOAT, right? It's Michael Jordan. That's who takes the last shot. And whether he hits the shot or not, he's already proven himself to be the GOAT. And that's their mindset. They're like, hey, whether God pulls through or not, it doesn't make him any less God. He's still God. He's the GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. I'm going to take my chances with God. As Romans 8:31 says, if God is for me, who can be against me? I want God on my side. God is on my team. God is going to take the final shot. I may be in need. I may need some help right now, and he can help me. He may not, but that doesn't make him any less God. I may need healing. He can heal me. He may heal me. He may not, but that doesn't make him any less God. I may be broke right now, and I could use a little help, God. I could use a job, right? And he may help me, and he may not, but it doesn't make him any less God. They knew him. And because they knew him, then they were willing to take the heat for him. Verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. So you can tell the king, he's kind of off his rocker right now. Like he's on tilt. He's incredibly furious. He's so mad he's not even rational, because if you really wanted to torture someone, you would actually cool it down, not heat it up, because they would live longer in the fire. But he's like, it gets so hot that the poor guys, their job's just, I got to take them to the hole, right? The poor guy, they die just taking the boys to the fire. And you'd say, once again, where does this strength come from? They knew God. But I would also say you only have the ability to take the heat like this in these types of moments, only willing to take a stand like this if you predetermine before the heat comes that God is greater than the cost. And you see this with their mentality. They're like, look, I'll go to school in Babylon. I'll get a Babylonian job. You can give me a brand new name. You can call me whatever you want to call me. Fine. I'm going to be a good citizen. I'm going to contribute to society in Babylon. King, I'm going to try to advance your causes. King, I'm going to try to make Babylon a better place. That's what I'm going to do. As I'm living here, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do my duty. I'm going to make this better, but I've made a decision. I won't compromise my faith in God. I won't compromise even if it costs me something. And for us, we can have that same mentality. I'm going to be a good citizen. I'm going to do my civic duty. I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to have a job. I'm going to contribute to the betterment of society. I'm going to try to make this place the best place for people to live, but I'm going to do it in a manner that's true to my King. I'm going to stay loyal to my heavenly kingdom over earthly ones, and that might mean that it'll cost me. And you have to predetermine if you're okay with that or not. Now, here's some good news. Nobody's going to throw you into a fiery furnace. Last I checked, they didn't have those on the corner of State and Mulford. So nobody's going to throw you into a fiery furnace for standing up for God, but that doesn't mean you might not lose something. I think back as I was writing this message to right when I first became a Christian. I was 16 years old, and my best friend at the time told me, hey, just if you're going to follow Jesus, just don't call me anymore. I'm glad that's fine for you, but I don't want to be around that Jesus stuff, so just don't call me anymore. Basically he told me I don't want to be your friend anymore if you're going to be a Christian. And so I had to be willing to lose a friendship because of my faith. And in the same way, you have to consider what you might lose. You might lose that sale at work. You might lose that promotion. You might be made fun of. Some of us don't like the idea of not being liked, but you may not be liked because you get lumped in with other Christians. You might be called names. You have to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? And I would say, yes, it is. Because God has been, is, and will always be faithful. He is never in the debt of any man. There's a guy by the name of Polycarp. He was lived in the 1st and 2nd century in a city called Smyrna. And as he lived in that city, he was the bishop of the church at the time. And he got arrested and tortured for being a Christian. And all he had to do to get the torture to stop is say 3 simple words that culture would commonly say at this time. 3 simple words, political pressure, everybody's doing it, no big deal, Caesar is Lord. That's all you have to say, it stops. Pain goes away, torture over, go back to your life. Caesar is Lord. And he said, no. 86 years I had served him, and he's done me no wrong. How could I blaspheme my King and my Savior now? He's been faithful. He is faithful, and he will be faithful. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, Your Majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Oh, look how the tone has changed. Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego came out of the fire. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Guys, not only did they not die, they didn't even smell. You can't go to JMK Nippons for 20 minutes and not smell. You walk into that place, you're gonna reek for a week. And they're in a fiery furnace. How does that happen? Because there was another in the fire. And who is this mystery fourth person? Well, most scholars and theologians will tell you this was a pre-incarnate representation and appearance of Christ, which tells us something that we should never forget. When you are willing to take a stand for God, Jesus will take a stand with you. Jesus will take a stand with you. But notice, he did not deliver them from the furnace. Sometimes it'd be nice. Hey, God, you could have showed up 20 minutes earlier. He delivered them in the furnace. And sometimes we will be delivered from our tests and our trials and the struggles and the fires that come. Sometimes that will happen. But many a times he delivers us through them. Because if you notice, it was the ropes that were burnt off. The only worldly thing that was burnt off were the ropes. They were unbound, and it's like the things of this world burn away, and we become more like Christ when we are refined by fire. But when you go through the flames, you have to know that Jesus will always stand with you when you do. Now, that place where full devotion can lead you sometimes, you're like, hey, I've made a decision. I got some character fortitude, societal pressure, political pressure. I'm not going to bend. I'm not going to conform. I'm going to stand out. I'm going to be a good citizen, but I'm going to do things God's way. But when you make that decision, that full devotion to Christ, that place where it might lead you to, it can be scary sometimes. You can second guess that when the heat's about to come. And that place can be lonely. But I want you to know that's the place where it turns out Jesus is at. And Jesus understands. You say, well, how does he understand? He went through the fire. He went to a cross and was willing to die for you and for I. And so in many ways, when you go through your fire, you can't even be closer to Jesus than you are in those moments because he understands. He stands with you. Tom Holland, the historian, not Spider-Man, I think that's an important caveat. He said this about the early Christians. They did not shrink from the blast of the crowd's breath, nor cower before the revolting humiliations visited on them. On the contrary, they fashioned out of their ordeals a public display of their devotion to Christ. The willingness of Christians to embrace excruciating tortures, which to those who sentenced them could only appear as lunacy, was founded on an awesome conviction that their Savior was by their side. I want to show you a really quick illustration. It's very simple, but I think you'll understand it. As we live in our Babylon, right? The Bible tells us we should guard our heart because there's lots of things that are just pulling at you and trying to tear at you, once again, trying to tell you who you are and how you should assimilate to culture and what you should believe. And all these things, they begin to pull at you to the point where if we're not careful, it can leave us exposed, unprotected. And then when the pressures of the world and society come, what happens is as these pressures come, they overwhelm us, and they overwhelm us in such a manner that it feels like now we're sinking. We don't know who we are. We don't know what to do. We're so overwhelmed by the fires of this life and the deep waters that life has brought to us that we now just don't even know what to do. But if you let Jesus protect your heart, to come inside of you, know that he stands with you, this does not mean that you won't go through deep waters. It does not mean that the pressure of this earth you won't feel it on all sides. It doesn't mean that the world won't tug at you, but you won't sink. You will be able to go through the deep waters and through the fires, knowing that Jesus has got you safe and secure in his arms, in his hands, wrapped firmly around your heart. It's as this verse Isaiah is speaking to us now. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze, because greater is he who is within me than he who is within the world. And when you truly believe that, and you take your faith seriously, and you make him the main thing, the one who holds your life and your heart together, it will give you a courage and a resolve that you didn't even know you had until it was tested. And then when you see it, you're like, wow, I can't believe it. You'll amaze yourself. You'll be like, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I was in the fire. I can't believe it. I survived that. And not only will that courage and resolve inspire you, but it will inspire all who watch you. And because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were faithful and they took their faith seriously, look at what happens. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for no other God can save in this way." The greatest king of the known world at that time, even he had to take a knee and acknowledge that no other God can save in this way. On that day, in that moment, he knew what we all know, that there is no other God like our God. And when we take our faith seriously, it inspires people to take the God of our faith seriously as well. When we take our faith seriously, it inspires people to take the God of our faith seriously as well. And so do you know what our Babylon and these earthly kingdoms need to see? One who believes in the King. Your friends, your family, your classmates, the people you work with, the people you go to school with, the people on your traveling sports team, you know what they need to see? You take a stand, live out your faith, and believe in the God of the universe. And you can show that by living out kingdom values and loving. I mentioned this last week, but love is a Christian superpower. When we love, it's so radical and countercultural, you can bring love into this world. And when you bring a love from God down here, do you know what people say? Man, no other God could love like that. No other God could save like that. There's a guy in my small group. He's one of those guys that he doesn't speak very often, but when he does, everybody listens because his words carry a lot of weight. And his story is pretty impressive because he grew up in a rough kind of situation. He had a bunch of addictions as a young teen, and he abused drugs, and he wanted to fit in to the world, and just like lots of people do, they make some bad choices relationally. Well, he found himself in some gangs. He was just a child of the world, trying to get by, letting the world define him and tell him who he was. And that was true until he met Jesus. And when he met Jesus, he set him free from all of that. You see, Jesus has a way of flipping our story on its head. And he met Jesus, and he got clean, got sober, put his life together, got married, and he moved to Rockford. And some of his old friends, they didn't understand why he made those choices. They maybe were feeling a little bit abandoned. They didn't get it. They didn't like it. They were maybe mad at him. I'm not sure. We're not sure why people feel what they feel sometimes. But he had an old friend call him, and he said, "Hey, I heard you became a Bible thumper and moved to Rockford." He's like, "Yeah, that's exactly what happened, actually. Yeah, I met Jesus, and I moved to Rockford, and Jesus turned my life around." But as he's lived his faith out, he's taken his faith seriously, he's had an impact on the world around him by people seeing the change that God has done in his life and in his heart. You see, that type of change, it points to a God who can save us from our insecurities, save us from our addictions, save us from our gangs, save us from bad relationships, save us from whatever it is that you need saving from. He is a God who can save anybody. And as people have seen the change in his life, he's had people ask, "Hey, what's different about you?" And he's been able, because Jesus has done something in him, to share that with the world around him. You see, it's actually not that hard. Yeah, we can be in this world, and we should be good citizens in this world, but you do not have to be of this world. You can live a good life, but you live it ultimately for your King. Because it's always worth it to take our faith seriously. Because when we take our faith seriously, people will take the Jesus behind your faith seriously if you do. Now, will it always be easy? No. But it's always worth it. Because if you're willing to take a stand for God, Jesus is willing to take a stand with you. Let me pray for you. God, help us be the type of people that as we live in this Babylon and we feel the pressures and the societal pull to blend in and conform and do what everyone else is doing, that we're willing to be good citizens, that we want to shine a light, that we want to be salt here on this earth, but we want to do so in a manner that glorifies your name. And that if the pressures push us to the point where we have to compromise our character or values, that we're willing to stand up and stand out and say, "No, I'm going to live for my King. I will not comply." But give us now, in these quiet moments of worship, the strength and the character and the fortitude to be those types of people. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.